NFL strategy show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, where that's right, you can get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, them YSRPs, simply by signing up with us at awesemo.com. Here's how you do it. I'll make it very simple. Unless one of our amazing social media fellas wants to throw the link in the YouTube chat, go to awesemo.com, click on the NFL link. You'll see the primetime article for tonight's San Francisco 49ers Arizona Cardinals game. It's a completely free article. Click on that. Read it, enjoy it. EMAC does a great job. But while you do, or after you do, click that Yahoo link right at the top. It'll take you to Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. And upon signing up, use that sign-up code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. Get in the $250,000 NFL baller, $25K to first. CSV uploads now as well. Some zero management fee contests. If you look in the lobby, get in there before everyone else does. Everything put into the pool by the players gets paid back out to the players. And the $31,000 Halloween baller, being festive over there, $31,000, $6K to first, $10 to enter. There's something for everybody on Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. If you're working with a smaller bankroll, the same goes for you. We've got the $1 to enter, $20K, $2K to first, NFL guaranteed, and so much more. Sign up, use that premium, or use that free link for the Showdown article, the primetime article today. The Yahoo link is right at the top. Get your $30 in YSRPs, which are as good as cash to be used to play, win, and if you choose, withdraw money on the site. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. I'm Dave Lochran, with me, Sal Vetri. What's going on, man?
What's going on, Luffy? Yeah, I'm excited to break this down. Full slate. We get just 10 games this time, so I think we'll be pretty good at not doing it for 2 hours here. We've been good at that, so yeah, I'm excited to break down, man.
Yeah, 10 games. I think we'll be okay. Generally speaking, we can get a little bit long-winded, but I don't know. The only thing with this slate is we have a lot of notable players that were either limited or didn't practice yesterday, and I think most of them will end up playing, but you're going to see a lot of Q tags until we get some clarity on this.
Yeah, I agree, and that'll just ownership-wise lower some of those things. I also think, like, high level on this slate, it just seems like across all positions that they've really taken a priority, DraftKings this week at least, to really price up, especially wide receiver. Just a lot of the guys that we're used to being maybe as sort of mid-range values.
What do you say we dive right into this?
Let's do it.
All right, so 10 games. We start with a barn burner here, really an electric contest between the Buffalo Bills and the Washington Redskins. Not something that any of us have a ton of excitement about watching, but you know what? Sometimes fantasy value can be found in the least anticipated spots. I don't know if that'll be the case in this one, Sal. We expect to see pretty low scoring here. The over-under among all of these games is the lowest by a lot. 37-point over-under, which is, I mean, for NFL in 2019, that really tells you all you need to know. Of course, always keep an eye out for weather in Buffalo. Starts to get cold there. It's going to be 36 degrees, a little bit of wind, 13 miles per hour, but nothing like last week. Let's start with the Bills side of this one. Do you have interest in anything from the Buffalo Bills side, starting with Josh Allen?
Yeah, so I want to have interest in Josh Allen. The price tag doesn't move since last week, $6,500. It's just tough in terms of going into tournaments or even cash to prioritize him. But in tournaments, it's really tough because he only has really one option that I feel good about, and that's John Brown. You can continue to play a guy like Cole Beasley, who is seeing steady targets, but nowhere near as much upside in those targets. And usually if he's scoring and getting in the end zone, that's really capping what John Brown can do in the day. So as it was last week, it's just going to remain for this Buffalo team. I think that it's really just John Brown for me. He's had the most routes run on this team. He's seen the most targets on this team, slightly ahead of Cole Beasley right now. He's lining up 46% of the time on the left side of the field. Josh Norman is usually playing about 75% of the time on that side of the field as well. So he'll see Norman this year, who's been pretty bad, probably his worst season of his career right now. He's allowed 5 touchdowns, 416 yards, and 140.7 passer rating against. So John Brown stands out as a guy who is finally in the 6K range at wide receiver. I think it's a fair price point. Other than that, not much. Devin Singletary saw a ton of snaps last week, but I think a lot of that was game flow dependent. Doesn't really help having Frank Gore out when you're trailing by 2 to 3 scores the whole second half.
Do you have any interest in the running game here? If there's dude, it's so tough to really find anything of value. I'm a big Devin Singletary fan, but what you basically have to rely on him getting one of his 7 or 8 touches for a touchdown, which he's or for huge chunk plays, which Sal, to be fair, he's done a phenomenal job of manufacturing big plays this season. But I don't know, this backfield to me, even in a game where they are favored by 9.5 points, it's a tough one to really get a vibe for. I don't know where I'd go to even if I wanted to. I suppose Singletary might be a tournament play, but he's not even that cheap.
Yeah, he's definitely more tournament play. And the thing with this week is they're coming in as 10-point favorites. So it just seems like it's a game where the snap count shifts back in the favor of Frank Gore, and they don't have to rely too much on Singletary's explosiveness and even in the passing game like they did a lot more last week in the second half against Philly. So it's not a spot that I really want to target here. I think we have other 4K running back options with Mark Walton and potentially what would become all the chalk in the world is Jalen Samuel if that opens up. So I don't think we have to test it out with Singletary. Even in tournaments, I think it might be a little thin.
Among guys like John Brown, Cole Beasley, anything for you?
Yeah, just John Brown. I mean, the matchup's going to be good for him. He's fine as a one-off. And on this slate, you see a lot of these middle-of-the-pack wide receivers, at least this week, who have been producing just priced all the way up to the 7K range. So it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of trying to find salary relief. And I think he's a fine 6K option at the lower end is John Brown at wide receiver.
Buffalo's run D got exposed last week, against the Philadelphia Eagles. They coughed up 218 yards on the ground. They even gave up, a monster rushing touchdown to Miles Sanders. But, still one of the more impressive defenses in the league. The Redskins have a 13.8 implied total here. Is it still Raymond James Stadium?
I think so, yeah.
I think so too. Well, we'll say in Buffalo. Is there any way you get to anything from the Redskins?
Yeah, likely not. I mean, it might be just a bottom 2 or 3 offense in the league right now. And right now, Case Keenum's still in the concussion protocol. So the limited snaps and touches that we've really seen and attempts from Dwayne Haskins haven't been promising. And that might be what's stepping in here. So Terry McLaurin just draws one of the worst matchups you can going into Buffalo against a good zone defense. He's not going to be shadowed. Tre'Davious White hasn't shadowed this year. A lot of the times you see that in zone defenses. White will stay on the left side of the field 92% of the time this year. So they can move McLaurin around to get away from him at least, but it's still not going to help. This zone defense just really limits big plays, not a ton of 20-plus yard plays against them this season. So no interest in McLaurin. Adrian Peterson is like only another person to mention. Chris Thompson continues not to practice with his toe injury, but as a 10-point underdog, it's tough. What I will say is, like you said last week, Buffalo was a little bit exposed on the ground, and Peterson and this offensive line right now have the second best run blocking advantage. Being down by 10, that might only lead to like 10 carries, but it is an interesting spot. I do think he's actually in a good situation in terms of his matchup. It's just a matter of if they're going to be trailing the home game, he might not actually have a chance to exploit that.
I think honestly we can move on to the next game where we're actually going to have a little bit of value. Do you want to talk about anything else here?
No, that's about it.
Carolina, Tennessee, a little bit friendlier of a matchup. Carolina. Very interesting about this team, Sal. Maybe you can shed some more light on it. But their run defense this season ranks 32nd, according to Football Outsiders. They've really hemorrhaged production to opposing running backs all season long, which is very interesting because their pass defense has been impressive for the most part. You look at somewhere like Pro Football Focus, they have them as a top 5 pass defense in coverage rating, and Football Outsiders has them 3rd in DVOA, minus 23% production in the passing game for opponents. But they have been a mega run funnel defense. I know last week could skew these numbers a little bit with Tevin Coleman breaking off, 7,000 yards on 10 touches, but they've still been burned in the run game quite a bit this year. Let's start with the Tennessee Titans. I think it's definitely worth talking about Derrick Henry here in a game where we only have a 41 over under. The Titans are actually 4-point dogs, but Henry might have a lot of room to run in a game that stays competitive. What are your thoughts on this Tennessee offense in Carolina?
Yeah, I think Henry's interesting. Seeing 18.9 rushing attempts per game, where that ranks out as the 6th highest on the slate, but he's only coming in as the 12th most expensive running back. So you're getting a lot of opportunity for what the price point is there. It's obviously the downside that he's just not heavily used in the passing game, and they're 4-point underdogs. But what we know from this Tennessee offense, even if Tannehill is going to be the quarterback there, even if they're down a touchdown or so, they're still going to make it a run priority team. They're not going to abandon the run until it's very much so that they have to be passing in the game. So you're going to have work for Derrick Henry throughout the game. You probably see more times than not 18 or more carries on the ground in this situation. And yeah, like you said, it's a good run blocking advantage for him according to Pro Football Focus. So I do like Derrick Henry at the price point. I usually am not somebody who gets to him or those types of players that have just no passing game upside, because if things get wonky, it just completely takes away those types of lineups for you. So I'll have interest probably like I usually do in Henry, based on the fact that he's a little bit cheaper this week than he normally is in the 6K range. I think I'll probably get a little bit more than I usually do.
Me too. I don't like that he isn't super involved in the passing game, but it does feel like a spot where he could easily cross 100 yards, maybe even tack on a touchdown or two, and you're getting him at a pretty good discount. The passing game, on the other hand, doesn't seem very fruitful. Ryan Tannehill has filled in admirably for Marcus Mariota, although he really didn't need to do much in order to look better than Mariota. But all in all, Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, colossal disappointments last week. I don't know if things get much better on the road here against a quality Carolina secondary.
Yeah, I don't have much interest this week. We saw last week they ran out a heavy just rotation to their wide receivers. So Corey Davis snaps came all the way down to the 60% range. I'm not sure it's smart to keep that up, but they also were working with short fields and didn't really need him out there for longer plays. So he's probably going to get James Bradberry this season, who's been one of the better cover cornerbacks in the league. He might shadow him. I'm not sure if they actually need to, based on the amount of times Davis will line up on the field here in two wide receiver sets, but it's a tough matchup for Corey Davis. A.J. Brown, Dante Jackson is likely to be back. He's missed a couple of weeks. He's been, I would say, okay this season, but the big thing that he has is a speed advantage in terms of A.J. Brown getting loose on him deep, but Brown does have 45 pounds on him, so there's an advantage there for Brown if you wanted to throw a dart at one of these guys, but not much interest in the passing game. Just a final note on Derrick Henry. We talked about the Panthers being bad this year against the run. They give up the seventh most fantasy points per game to the running back, but they give up the least receptions. So if they're giving up that much production and the least receptions for PPR formats, you know that it's just coming on the ground, which again helps Derrick Henry.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if they faced any, I haven't looked, but I wonder if they faced any like big time pass catching running backs this season. It doesn't really matter though, because Derrick Henry isn't one of them. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you here. But yeah, looking at the other side of this game, Christian McCaffrey was limited in practice with a knee injury. I don't really think there's any reason to believe that he won't play, but what are your thoughts on McCaffrey here? He's $10,000 on DraftKings. If you're getting to McCaffrey, you're paying a huge premium on him, $40 on Yahoo, but he's also the most productive fantasy option in the game.
Yeah, so I think there's some caveats to where the slate can go based on injury news. If Jalen Samuel opens up, it makes it much more justifiable and easier to get to McCaffrey. Some of the top end stacks this week, I imagine people will be interested in Seattle, people interested in Tampa Bay, and pairing those wide receivers, it's going to get expensive in the 7K range. So fitting in McCaffrey, it might constrain some lineups. Once again, like last week, though, this week, though, he's the highest owned player in the slate. But like last week, no matter what the price point is or the matchup, he can come through for you. It's a different situation this week, though, as it seems all the tight ends are priced up. It seems all the wide receivers are priced up. So I have interest in McCaffrey, but it's really going to depend. And maybe hopefully by Saturday, the show with Chris will know what's the status of guys like James Conner and maybe some value opening up. But like always, there's going to be interest here. It's a plus matchup for him just because of his receiving game work, no matter where the game goes.
Yeah, there's also somebody priced around him that we'll get to next that I really like. And generally, it's always hard to look at like a 1v1 pivot from McCaffrey. But I'm definitely interested in a guy we'll get to in a moment. What about the passing game for Carolina here? We've seen Logan Ryan, like I said a few weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, he's been targeted a ton, but he's definitely made life tough on opposing receivers. One of the lower passing ratings in the league, allowed the quarterbacks. But you've got him here, likely in the middle of the field for Tennessee. You've got guys like DJ Moore, who the production hasn't been spectacular, but his price is down, and he's averaging, he's got 57 targets in 7 games. He's had 8 or more targets all but twice this season, double-digit targets in 3 of 7. What do you think of Moore and Curtis Samuel here?
So I like both of them here, and it's because of the price points on a slate where they're the ones that stand out in the 4K range to me. Both of these players, and I probably prefer to get to DJ Moore over Samuel, but it's almost splitting hairs at that point. Both of these players have floors around like 7 fantasy points or so, and we know what their upside is, closer to the 20-point range. So where their price points are now, yeah, in a tournament, if they get you 8-10 fantasy points, it's absolutely going to kill you. But any wide receiver will get there. That will happen if they score that little for you. So these are guys that have upside and have a stable floor and are very cheap now. And I imagine they go under the radar and continue to. Obviously, Kyle Allen throwing them the ball isn't the greatest, but it hasn't been all that bad. They've been able to produce in some games. So I like both of these guys here. You're going to have DJ Moore facing probably Malcolm Butler, which is why I favor him. We saw what Mike Evans did to Butler last week. Not the same type of receiver, but it's still been the story of the season for Malcolm Butler. He's been playing poorly. 389 yards, 30 receptions, which is the bigger number to point out for a PPR format. Adore Jackson missed last week. We'll kind of track that status. If he's out, then it's also a really good matchup for Curtis Samuel. So if Adore Jackson's in, he's been quality this year. The other cornerback for the Titans, he'll probably be on Curtis Samuel, which makes him a little bit worse of a play. But so right now, DJ Moore is the one that stands out.
I like DJ Moore quite a bit. I'd say one of my top plays from this game. Thoughts on Greg Olson or anything else?
I mean, yeah, Olson continues to just run a ton of routes. The only tight ends running more routes than him are Hooper, Kelsey, Ingram, and Ertz. So at 3,500, you're going to get a lot of usage from him on the field. It's fine to go to in a week where it seems like if you're not paying up for that 6K tier, you're automatically paying down. So he's just a guy who's there. If he shows up a little bit, it's fine.
Okay. Yeah. He would have to just pop up in crunches. There's no way I'm hand-making lineups and Greg Olson lands in it. Yep. Kyle Allen just hasn't looked his way consistently enough. And while this isn't a horrible matchup, it's certainly not one where you're like, all right, well, he's got Tampa Bay or he's got Arizona. To me, it's very much a take it or leave it, preferably leave it situation. Let's move to Minnesota and Kansas City, though. Patrick Mahomes they think he'll be back by week 10. He hasn't been ruled out, though, for this game, but trending in the direction that he's not going to play. However, I think you've seen pretty decent production from Matt Moore, and that's what happens when you have a coach that's creative with play calling. And, of course, great skill players. We've actually seen a lot of this season, whether it was Kyle Allen coming in, whether it was Matt Moore coming in, even Matt Schaub last week with 300-plus passing yards. It hasn't made a huge difference in terms of their skill player production. But we don't have a line on this game yet for obvious reasons, one being Mahomes, the other being questionable Adam Thielen. But I want to start with Dalvin Cook. I say it all the time, Sal. This is a really, really bad run defense for Kansas City. I mean, they have just been mutilated this season on the ground, and I expect that to continue going forward. They've already lost key players on the defensive line. What are your thoughts on Dalvin Cook, who, look, hasn't been as good as McCaffrey? We get that. But he's also had fantasy totals of 29, 31, 27, 19, 30. He had a 13 against Philly, 31 and 28. He has been remarkably consistent with a high ceiling all season long.
Yeah, so my thoughts the second I saw the slate and the salaries were, oh, wow, I can see once again Christian McCaffrey going lower owned, and everybody wanted to play Dalvin Cook against the Chiefs who continue getting slashed. But ownership right now has Cook almost a third of the ownership as McCaffrey, which is just something that I wasn't expecting. I like Dalvin Cook way more in this situation than McCaffrey. It's nothing against McCaffrey. You save $500. You get Cook, who, McCaffrey's seeing the most volume in the league, but Cook right now per game is going out there and seeing 23.8 opportunities per game. He's seeing over 4 targets per game, so he has that versatility. And yeah, this is a spot against Kansas City, dead last in run defense according to Pro Football Focus. And a lot of that is, one, they're bad, but they're also just banged up. Like, they have secondary guys in there who aren't going to just improve week to week at this point in the middle of the season. Xavier Williams, they lost a couple weeks ago. They haven't been without Frank Clark, or they haven't been with him, or Chris Jones, who continued to trend towards not playing this week. It's just a really good spot for a team in Minnesota that came into the year wanting to run the ball. Sure, the wide receivers just started voicing out that they want to throw, but that the game plan here, especially if they are leading, like the spread should indicate if there's no Mahomes, is just to run the ball. And I imagine Cook sees 20-plus touches on the ground against the league's worst run defense, and that's a spot at 10% ownership that I'm sure I'm going to have at least double that amount of ownership on him.
Yeah, I would think so too. I really do like him this week. And I mean, I don't know if this continues, but I mean, we've seen some running backs do some damage in the passing game as well. Dalvin Cook's, the bulk of his production, that hasn't been where it is, but they're allowing the 5th most targets to running backs per game. And actually, when you look at it this way, Chicago's allowing 8.4, and that's the second most. Kansas City's at 8.1. So they're right behind. Tennessee's at 9.1, which is well above everyone. But I mean, they're right there for the second most allowed to running backs this season. They're also allowing the second most yards to pass catching running backs. It's a pretty interesting spot both on the ground and through the air for Dalvin.
Yeah, I agree. And like the argument against this would just be that they're bad also in the air. And if this game stays close, Kirk Cousins, whatever. But the argument that it could go right just back to Kirk Cousins in the passing game is, I mean, historically, Kirk Cousins in outdoor conditions and on the road has not been great. So I would imagine they don't want to put this on his arm, especially if they get an early lead here. So yeah, Cook just seems like, at least to me, the more optimal play compared to a priced up McCaffrey as well, if the ownership holds at that difference.
Football Outsiders has Kansas City top 4 in coverage this season. Of course, it's different on Pro Football Focus. They have them 18th, so very much in the middle of the road. The thing is that before Mahomes went down, the way to beat this team was to run the ball, right? We saw Detroit almost do it. We saw the Colts and Frank Reich do it to perfection. In Kansas City, we saw Aaron Rodgers do it. Interestingly enough, though, he did it with the running backs, just not through the air. I still think that this is a good enough Kansas City offense that looks to move the ball downfield quick. Granted, completely different with Mahomes. That you would have to think, and you would have to think, Sal, that the Vikings look to get this run game going early. I mean, I don't. Especially if Thielen is out. Like Mike Zimmer clearly wants to go with this run first approach, and it's worked for them this season. They've put a ton of points on the board. I think Dalvin Cook, unless things go terribly awry, gets 20 plus carries easy.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that's just kind of the way that this one, at some point, even if it's in a neutral game script for most of it, will just play out.
Where are you at on the rest of this game?
Yeah, so I really don't have much interest in these wide receivers at their price points. I mean, if Thielen is out, then yes, Diggs becomes more interesting, but it's not a spot where I want to stack a Kirk Cousins at a top dollar Kirk Cousins price point, where more times than not, he probably throws the ball 28 times and nowhere near to the efficiency of guys like Russell Wilson, who can pay off that tag for you at that many pass attempts, or an Aaron Rodgers. So I don't really have interest in, it's a really expensive stack if you wanted to go to Cousins, Thielen, and Diggs. And I'm just personally leveraging this as a spot. Dalvin Cook sees 24 touches and Alexander Mattison sees 6 to 8, and they just run way more than they pass. So paying top dollar, and I was very surprised to see top dollar on both of these receivers' price tags, is probably not something I'm going to do all that much, especially with the other receivers around them in the range.
Would you say that for the most part, Kansas City is a run funnel defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have been since the beginning of last year. This year, they've been as bad, but the injuries don't help them. So, yeah, I definitely think so.
Me too. Rushing yards allowed per game is kind of been all over the map, but you've got a 129, a 203, a 186, a 180, a 192, a 118. Like they've been carved up, allowing only 232 passing yards per game. That's really not a high mark. So, I'm with you 100%. It's a spot where I really like Dalvin Cook. And the big thing for me too, I don't want to spend too much time here, but it's pretty important. The big thing is, Chris Spags and I did the ownership first look show yesterday, right? And the disparity in ownership between Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook was huge. Yeah. If that stays the same, where like McCaffrey's above 30 and Dalvin Cook's around 10 or 11%, that just makes him even more enticing.
Yeah, like I said just at the start, when I opened up these salaries to start, I really thought it would be honestly the opposite. So
yeah, me too.
It makes it easier because I like Cook a little bit more this week.
What do you think of Kansas City against Minnesota? This is at Arrowhead, so maybe it helps them, but it sure didn't help in the World Series. Home teams went 0-7 in that
first time, right?
Yeah, crazy, dude. Washington got outscored 19-3 at home, and Houston got outscored 30-11 at home. Never seen anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely insane. I saw the end of that game last night. Pretty wild.
But anyway, any interest in Kansas City skill players here?
I wish I did, but probably not. Like Travis Kelce's price, I mean, it hits the 6K range finally, but it's 6,900. So it's not like it's something I want to be paying for. He's priced for the upside of Patrick Mahomes throwing him the ball. You saw last week he kind of got open on a really nice play design. So there's that upside there for him, but what you get more times than not is just a output with Matt Moore at quarterback, probably in the range of some of these other 6K tight ends who are just that much cheaper. So I probably don't get the Kelsey at top dollar. I really haven't been getting to him too much when Mahomes is back there at top dollar. It's just really hard around 7K to pay for a tight end, especially on this sort of a slate where you have the two highest priced running backs we've seen all year and a ton of wide receivers. Tyreek Hill, I mean, it was like the definition last week of Matt Moore in that game. He underthrows Tyreek Hill by like 4 yards. Hill, if Mahomes is in the game, it's a 70-yard touchdown. It ends up getting broken up by two defenders, and that's just the exact, in one play, a snapshot of how his ceiling is absolutely capped by Matt Moore. Sure, Moore can make that pass sometimes, but nowhere near to the extent in Matt or Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill is like the cheat code of the NFL with both of their skill sets, and it takes away a lot of his upside. So to pay sort of a top dollar, $7,400 tag, probably won't get there. Sammy Watkins is the one that stands out the most because he's affordable in the 4K range, but it's not like it's a priority. It's probably a secondary option, if anything.
Yeah, it is an interesting spot though, just because he got 8 looks last game, and like as you pointed out, you're not going to be taking. You might get to you might attempt a few deep balls here to Tyreek Hill, but there's no way they're going to look to open this up as much, especially against Minnesota. I think it's very possible that you do see a scenario where, they work more on short yardage passes, these short intermediate routes, and just hope that guys like Kelsey and Sammy Watkins can produce, maybe take a shot or two on Tyreek Hill. But I'm with you. I think Sammy Watkins would probably be the guy, not a priority, but sub 5K makes sense. Anything else before we move to the next one?
No, I think that's it.
All right, let's talk about Miami and the New York Jets. Listen, bad football games can create decent fantasy value. This might be one of them. 41 over under. Jets are 3-point favorites on the road, 22 total, 19 implied total for Miami. Let's start here with Sam Darnold. 2 just grisly starts. I mean, heinous. Where you're 7 interceptions to 2 touchdowns. He lost 2 fumbles, turned it over on downs a couple times, even got tackled in the end zone for a safety. Things don't get much worse. But things also don't get much worse than Miami's defense. They've lost Xavier Howard to the IR. They're already a team that ranks towards the bottom of the league in almost every single relevant defensive metric. 31st in pass defense or run defense DVOA, 32nd in pass defense DVOA. The yards allowed per game, both through the air and on the ground, are dismal. 160 rushing yards, 4.8 yards per attempt. Yards per game through the air is, what is it? I think it's lower, 253, but that's because teams haven't really needed to pass on them. They have an average of 8.9 yards per attempt or per reception, which is the second highest in the league. Like literally everything about this defense is dreadful, and now they lose Xavier Howard to the injured reserve. I mean, it's bad. Yeah,
it's really bad, and it should be, in theory, a get-right spot for Sam Darnold. It could be a get-right spot for this defense on how Darnold has been playing. But, yeah, earlier in the week, I had Darnold as sort of not a priority, but a group of players at quarterback that I was probably going to want to get to. Now he falls to a secondary option, just looking at it more in terms of getting to stacks here. The wide receivers, Robbie Anderson makes sense if you're trying to get to him in a tournament, stack him with Darnold, but I just don't know how much I trust the upside of Crowder. Crowder will have a very good matchup in the slot if they continue to roll out Jamal Wilson there, who has not been performing well. They might be replacing him from what I'm seeing. Either way, though, it's a spot where you need Crowder to see like an 8 to 10 target game more times than not. And do they need to go with that much passing volume to the slot here when we just talk about how bad they are also on the ground? So Darnold went from a interest that I had maybe as like my 4th highest interest at quarterback this week to like 6th or 7th, only because when it comes to tournaments, it's really Anderson that I feel confident stacking him with. It doesn't seem like the type of game where Crowder hits a 18 to 20 point game relying on like 8 to 10 catches.
Yeah, tough one for me because I think Robbie Anderson you should probably see a lot of Ken Webster, right?
Yes.
You would think so. He's been really bad this season. The numbers speak for themselves. 1.7 yards per route covered. Terrible grade on Pro Football Focus. But with how bad Sam Darnold's been, and you kind of just alluded to it, you would think that the play here would be that Adam Gase says, all right, you know what? We're paying this running back a ton of money. And forget about that. He's a good running back. We haven't been able to block for him. He hasn't been able to get anything going on the ground. But we finally have a spot where we're not likely to be falling behind early. And we should be able to run this ball down Miami's throat. Le'Veon Bell, however, is priced up on these dynamic pricing sites because of the matchup. So how much does that play into it for you? He's $7,700 on DraftKings. He's up to $26 on Yahoo, which is a lot more respectable. But I mean, you've got a guy who's been really, really underwhelming over the past several weeks, and he's the third highest priced running back. Not only that, he's the fourth highest priced player overall on DraftKings.
Yeah, so Bell's definitely priced up, and this is just an absolutely crush spot for running backs all season long in terms of the amount of points given up by Miami to running backs and also just rushing attempts. Third most points given up and third most rushing attempts, so it's correlating pretty well. So there's going to be a great amount of opportunities for a guy in Bell who continues to just play the far majority of the snaps and not really have another running back taking some of his work. So yeah, he's priced up to 7,700 on this slate. If you're not paying all the way up, or even if you are and you want to squeeze it, but if you're not paying all the way up, he's sort of in that second tier. And a lot of these guys in this 7K running back range either have very difficult matchups or their health is kind of a question mark. So I'm right now just defaulting to Le'Veon Bell based on this matchup. They are rarely a 6-point favorite, 5.5-point favorite here on different books. The major concern is that they released their offensive lineman Osmelli, and Khalil got hurt in the last game. Their center, so they're down 2 offensive linemen. Khalil has been terrible, probably going to get replaced anyway, so it might actually be an upgrade for them. But that's a little bit of a concern, reshuffling the offensive line midweek, really. But I like this spot as a 6-point favorite. Miami's just been really bad on the ground. Again, if you're paying for like McCaffrey or Cook this week, it might be very hard to fit Bell. So seeing his ownership at 20% kind of makes me wonder how a lot of these lineups with McCaffrey and Bell both being up there are getting constructed. I imagine there's just a ton of value people are throwing in at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I mean, with how this team's blocked, I don't know how much, like you said, I don't know how much of a difference it makes, right? They're 31st in adjusted line yards. They're 31st in running back yards, which is both of them behind only the Cincinnati, or ahead of the Cincinnati Bengals. We know how bad they've been. They've gotten their backs to the second level, according to Football Outsiders, at the second lowest clip this season, ahead of only the Chicago Bears. Like we even have like open field ranks, right? For offensive line and blocking. They're 31st in that. So across the board, they are last or second to last in almost every single relevant statistical category, Sal.
Yeah, I mean, they've been terrible, and it's just right now a factor of if you're going to fall in that 7K range, he stands out because he's facing Miami. I think overall my favorite play in the game is Robbie Anderson. I think there's a lot of upside there. It's not like they're 15-point favorites and it's only going to be running. There's still probably a chance and a good chance that Darnold throws 30 to 32 times in this game on average. If not, that's a little bit below. So yeah, Anderson's my favorite play. If I get to Bell, I'll get to him, but I expect to probably not land in that range as my RB2 after McCaffrey or Cook this week.
Yeah, and Bell, it's not like that. It's not like right now that price tag is depressing his ownership either. Like
exactly, and that's a big part of it.
He's coming in up there. I think Robbie Anderson's the most appealing too, because Robbie Anderson doesn't need massive passing volume to get it done. Now, on one hand, maybe Sam Darnold and the offense is humming against this Dolphins team, and we do see Robbie Anderson get 8 or 9 looks. That'd be great. But it is nice to know that if that's not the case, and Le'Veon Bell is producing on the ground and they stick with the rushing attack, that Robbie Anderson, on 6 targets or so could still put up some really big numbers. But look, he's a volatile player. His quarterback has looked completely lost this year, but you're getting him at a decent price in the best matchup you could possibly find in no Xavier Howard. It's tough to get away from that. Hey, what do you think? What do you think about Miami? Mark Walton looks to be the lead guy here. Kalen Ballage, seemingly the goal line back, which sucks. But aside from that, I mean, this is a football team that has Ryan Fitzpatrick starting. He's confirmed as the starter again. Mike Gesicki, I don't know what to make of this guy. He's been disappointing through his first 1.5 seasons as a pro. Devontae Parker, look, the air yards are there, but it's hard to really put a lot of weight into air yards when the ball comes nowhere close to him. He did have 6 receptions for 59 yards, but of course, his long was only 52. The deep ball hasn't been there more than once or twice this season. And then, of course, Preston Williams, a guy a lot of us like as a player, just hasn't shown a ton of upside with very limited ceiling. You could make arguments for so many of these guys. Like, Albert Wilson, this guy, before he got injured, was targeted on this many, a huge amount of his snaps. And now he's only seen 4 targets in back-to-back games. So that's a lot to talk about, Sal. We're kind of just running the the gamut there, you can see there isn't a lot to have faith in for this Miami team.
Yeah, it really, I mean, you can get to those receivers you talked about. Both will have fine matchups. Both see a lot of air yards with Fitzpatrick airing it out more times than not, always trailing in these games. So if you want to get to them in the 4K, low 4K range, it's okay. Just expect there more times than not to not be a tournament winning score. It's just kind of a salary relief thing. I think Mark Walton's definitely in play, but the big piece here is, do they activate a third running back for Sunday's game? They didn't. They sort of had somewhat short notice. It was just Mark Walton and Kalen Ballage, for the most part, outside of a fullback, seeing the workload on the night game against the Steelers. So you saw Mark Walton play 87% of the snaps. He ran 34 routes. And as an underdog here, you could probably expect maybe not that many routes, but somewhere around the high 20s in the range of routes run. So, yeah, I actually think Mark Walton, especially if James Conner plays and doesn't open up Jalen Samuels, is a fine value to fit in some of those top-end wide receivers and running backs. He's not a smash play by any means, but if you're going to get a guy who might project out to catch 2 or 3 balls here as sort of a median, just in the receiving game, you're going to get 5 points from him. Whatever he can do on the ground is somewhat of a bonus there. I think it makes sense at his price point to have him in play.
Yep. I mentioned it yesterday with Spags. 87% snaps is pretty encouraging, but 17 total looks. I mean, that's really not bad given the 6 targets and 11 carries. They fell behind late or in the second half, and we started to see the touches dwindle a bit on the ground. But yeah, Walton probably will be featured in a game that's competitive. Is that all you've got for Miami?
Yeah, that's it. Like, I think the wide receivers are fine if you want to get to them. I slightly prefer Preston Williams. Devontae Parker's been Fitzpatrick's, I would say, favorite target just in terms of how many looks there. But I'll take Preston Williams' matchup. That said, though, they're very far down the secondary option list.
Okay, we've got the Eagles at home against the Chicago Bears. Chicago Bears team, man, you want to talk about struggles at the quarterback position. It doesn't get much worse than what we've seen out of Mitchell Trubisky this year. 42 over under. Eagles are 5-point home favorites, 23.5 implied total, 18.5 for the Chicago Bears. Desean Jackson has been practicing in a limited fashion. Doug Peterson expects to get him back, but there's talk that he won't be playing at full health. Right now, I'm not going to go anywhere near Desean Jackson until I see that he can get through an entire game without being hobbled by that without being affected by that abdomen injury, especially against the Chicago defense that, despite some holes recently, is still the only reason this team isn't 0-7 or whatever they are. I think they've had a bye. Miles Sanders is another one. Finally looked solid last week on only 3 carries, but has been explosive as a pass catcher. He expects to suit up with that shoulder injury, but hasn't been practicing. Here's where I want to start, Sal. I want to start with Jordan Howard, because Jordan Howard has actually, he's been better than the numbers suggest, and the numbers suggest that he's been decent. He picks up positive yards on every play. He hasn't been featured much in the passing game, but the big thing is he had 23 carries last week against Buffalo. His price is coming up a little bit, though. Just talk to me about where you're at, where you stand on someone like Howard in a game where his team is a 5-point favorite at home.
Yeah, so I think if Miles Sanders was to miss this game, you might see Jordan Howard playing or getting close to 80% of the workload here, if not more, with just Boston Scott behind him. Like you said, he's expecting to suit up, but I still think it's a fine spot for Howard. He kind of ranks out similar to how a guy like last week, Tevin Coleman, same type of price range, should see the majority of the work in his backfield. And if he gets you touchdowns, he can pay it off. So at that 5K range, if you're not getting to the Mark Waltons of the world or whoever's down there, I do like Jordan Howard here. Again, 5-point home favorite. He likely sees, even if Sanders plays, around 15 carries, probably all of the red zone and goal line work. So it's a nice spot for a guy who is not active in the receiving game, but can snag you a reception or two. The Eagles in this one are going to have the upper hand in run blocking advantage. He's probably a guy who I didn't check his ownership, but right now Jordan Howard is coming in at like 1% ownership. Yeah. So it's just a spot where you're leveraging the field by, if you get 4% of him, many multiples, and I think I'm okay with that. So I like Howard much more relative to the field. If he's going to be 1% owned, it makes it easy to not have any real leverage in my lineups if things go wrong.
Alshon Jeffrey right now coming in at 15.5% on DraftKings. That seems really high, especially with Desean Jackson expected back in the lineup.
Yeah, that does seem high to me. I know he's getting or has been seeing some volume, but a lot of it's not down the field. He usually sees like 2 passes at best downfield. He's been getting a couple of bigger yard plays, but I know one of them was after the catch. So it's a spot where, yeah, he's probably touchdown dependent. He's 5K, so he's cheaper. But I would rather get to, like we were talking about earlier, a DJ Moore or Curtis Samuel in that spot.
Yeah. Is there anything else for the Eagles that you like?
Yeah, Zach Ertz. I mean, if Desean Jackson comes back, then it's definitely going to relieve and really make this offense probably less narrow in terms of where the focuses can be for the defense. So even if he comes back to a limited role and he's just on the field, I think it's going to relieve Zach Ertz. And when you talk about just the tight end pricing this week, you have 3 guys in that 6K range. And then you have just Zach Ertz, $1,300 less than Hunter Henry at $4,700. It's kind of hard to ignore where his price point falls for what we know can be his ceiling close to 30 points.
How about the other side with Chicago? David Montgomery, clearly his best game as a pro last time out, 135 yards on 27 carries. Also by far a season and career high, was even targeted 5 times in the passing game. But this feels like a spot where unless Mitchell Trubisky magically turns things around, the Eagles are going to make it very difficult for them to move the ball on the ground. And they've done that against teams, and they should continue to do that against teams with weak passing with weak passing offenses. They've also gotten healthier with pretty big guy with Jernigan back at practice, Maddox in that secondary back at practice. The defense is getting a little bit healthier, which probably doesn't help them either.
Yeah, definitely not a spot to go to David Montgomery here after last week. Now the price point gets bumped up as it probably should, but just draws a brutal matchup. As you said, the defensive line gets healthier. They've just been very tough to running backs on the ground, only 66.8 yards per game. They are giving up receptions, 6 most receptions to running backs, but that doesn't really help David Montgomery's cause all that much. So not a spot I want to go to. I don't want to go to Mitch Trubisky, who right now is dead last in the entire league for fantasy points per attempt. On this slate, he's dead last in touchdown percentage. He's only having 5 rushing yards per game, which was surprising to me, probably partially due to injury. So, yeah, it's not a spot I want to get to Mitchell Trubisky with a team total of 19. I do, however, think that you can get to Allen Robinson. Jalen Mills has looked good since coming back, but I think it's a spot where Robinson's moved around enough, and it's by far not a bad matchup for Robinson that you can be fine getting there. He has 32% of the Bears' red zone targets, so when they do get there, there's a really good chance they're at least going to be looking his way. And I think Anthony Miller is sort of a milli maker, maybe a little bit better than that type of a value this week. He didn't play a ton of snaps last week, but they were so run heavy, they didn't have to run 3 wide receiver sets. But previous 2 weeks, he was running in the 70% range, gets a good matchup in the slot, which whoever it might be for the Eagles, it potentially could be Sidney Jones in the slot this week. We'll see. It's just going to be a good matchup for Anthony Miller. Again, you have Mitch Trubisky throwing you the ball, so not great, but Miller's price point is in the 3K range. I think it's going to be somebody I have in larger GPP pools.
How much interest would you say in terms of priority you have for Allen Robinson then?
Yeah, so the priority for him is definitely going to be a little bit lower just because when it comes to stacking teams like we're going to talk about Detroit, Tampa Bay, some of their receivers are going to jump up. So he's probably, in terms of the top end in pricing, maybe like a 4th or 5th receiver I get to, only because he's going to be a guy I get to in one-off spots, because I'm probably not going to have a ton of Mitch Trubisky stacks. And I had to guess, I'd have 0. Okay.
Yeah, I don't anticipate myself having much Trubisky either, but I do really like Allen Robinson.
I have written down here, like, could you imagine the receiver this guy would be numbers wise if Mitch Trubisky and Blake Bortles weren't his quarterbacks for the far majority of his career? And that's the best quarterbacks he's had.
So very true. He'd easily be one of the best in the league, honestly.
Yeah.
He would. There's no question about it. I love the guy. Yeah, he's averaging 1.93 yards per route run this season, which is, given his quarterback, that's really good. Right?
Yeah.
It's not like that's not a phenomenal number if you're comparing it to guys like Julio Jones or, of course, Tyreek Hill and Amari Cooper. But given what he's been able to work with, I'm astounded that it's even been that good. Not to mention that he's actually been one of the most targeted players on the deep ball, which I just think really helps him in this matchup. Yes, the Eagles have gotten some help in the secondary, but Jalen Mills and Maddox, they're not going to make it so Allen Robinson can't produce. I think despite Mitchell Trubisky's struggles, you probably still get a pretty good game from Allen Robinson here.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like relative to these other high-end wide receivers, 6,800 is a fair price point.
No question. And he's already produced in spots where they just haven't moved the ball at all. And he's the only one that does anything. So I have no doubt he can do it again on Sunday. How about Pittsburgh and Indiana? Where obviously waiting on some news with James Conner. He didn't practice yesterday. He considered himself day to day. Benny Snell, by the way, didn't practice either. This is important because it's very possible that you could see Jalen Samuel inherit a massive workload, Sal, in the event, that both of these guys are out. We saw Connor miss time earlier this season, we saw Samuel miss earlier this season, and Benny Snell in a game that they won quite handily was pretty involved. You've only got a 42 over under here. A lot of low totals on this slate. 20.5 total for Pittsburgh, 21.5 for the Colts. The Colts are 1-point road favorites, so it should be a competitive game. Give me your take on if Jalen Samuels plays and if he doesn't play, if Connor plays and if he doesn't play. I think Samuel would become, immediately a top value option at that price point in the event that Connor is out.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would probably become one of the better plays in the slate just because of how expensive the top end running backs are. It makes it a lot easier to pair them. Right now, James Conner didn't practice Wednesday, but we've kind of already got indication on like Monday, Mike Tomlin saying that James Conner might not practice until Friday. And he doesn't have to practice at all to play. So this might actually, and it probably will be something that goes all the way up until Sunday morning. So just make sure to watch that in the injury report. If Connor is out, a $4,000 Jalen Samuel against the team in the Colts that at least last year gave up the most receptions to running backs. This year it's a little bit skewed because they haven't been facing too many pass catching running backs outside of like week 1 against Austin Eckler. But it's just a good spot overall for guys that catch the ball in the short part of the field, like running backs, tight ends, and slot receivers against his own defense. So if Connor is out, Samuel's the guy that I want to get to. If Connor ends up playing and we say that there's some sort of full workload, he has some interest of mine at 7,600. And again, a quality matchup for him and a team that just wants to run the ball with Rudolph as your quarterback, but much more interest goes to a cheaper Jalen Samuel. Vance McDonald actually stands out once again if you were sort of just punting or paying down at tight end this week. He's a guy who continues to run more routes and get healthier each week. And again, this is a spot where we've seen Mason Rudolph have a connection with him a little bit this season, especially when he's healthy. And also, again, the tight end position against the Colts is a spot where you usually see, if not a lot of yardage, a good amount of receptions. So it's a good price point. Juju is just sort of a mad play for me. I think he's cheap. I think he's probably a little too cheap. It's a tough matchup against this zone that doesn't usually play a lot of man-to-man coverage in the slot. So he'll see a lot of zone defenses, which means maybe he just gets peppered with 7 or 8 catches, and that helps him get there. His price point, I'll have him as an interest just because the 6K range is a little bit thin.
It is, yeah. A spot where, like, if I'm one-offing, I'd probably want to get up to Allen Robinson, who we just talked about. Yeah. But, I could see Juju being viable here. And you know what? It's not like Mason Rudolph is a big downgrade from Mitch Trubisky. Maybe not at all. What about Indianapolis? T.Y. Hilton was limited in practice due to a calf injury. I think he plays here. That my guess would be that T.Y. Hilton will be on the field. Outside of that, no real injuries here. But let me say, since Minka Fitzpatrick arrived in that trade for the Pittsburgh Steelers, their defense, and I get it, they've faced some pretty bad offenses, but their defense has been really good. They've racked up, let's see, 10 interceptions over their last 5 games. They've recovered, my God, 7 fumbles. They're racking up sacks at a very high clip. They've just looked so much better. And yes, they've faced some teams that aren't great, but they've also faced the Chargers in LA. They faced Baltimore, San Francisco. I think it's bolstered their defense significantly, and they weren't getting any credit early in the season because they had a couple ugly games against Seattle and the Patriots. But I think this is a very good Steelers defense. I wouldn't be surprised if this game stays very low scoring.
Yeah, T.Y. is probably not a guy that I even have as much of a secondary interest this week right now. You mentioned it. Since Minka got there, this defense has been great. They got Joe Hayden healthier too. So already a solid run defense, now getting a little bit better in the coverage spot. So not a spot that I really want to target T.Y., especially dealing with an injury. He's just being used differently this year, which has been productive, especially before his first tweak of his injury. He's getting 25% right now of a red zone target share. He's only getting a 27% share of air yards, which in the past that number's been in the upper 30s. He just has to they've been using him differently because there's no Devin Funchess getting injured early, and they have to kind of just change the way that this offense rolls without having Andrew Luck out there. So he doesn't have the same big play upside because of the defensive backs he'll be facing as normally he does. And then also this year, he's just not used that way. So it's a fair price point for what his upside can be. It's just tough for me to want to get there this week. And then it's really just Marlon Mack is the only other option that would become viable unless you're going to just punt one of these tight ends between Doyle and Ebron, which I probably won't. But it's a really tough matchup for Marlon Mack against the Steelers run defense that is just giving up 84.7 yards per game. The only upside for Mack is that he's just getting peppered with volume, 19.7 carries per game, but probably not a spot that I get to all that much, if any, from Indy.
Yeah, me neither. I'm actually okay moving on if you want to as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, before we do, NFL Strategy, all one word, is the promo code to get you 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus membership. That's right. Ownership projections, player projections, the top stack tool. All of this can be found at awesemo.com/join. Actually, if you scroll down, you'll see that we have videos for all of our tools that you can check out. Not all of them, but most of our tools. You can check out videos on how to use them. Alex Baker will describe all of that for you. He is the #1 ranked player, DFS player in the world. Ownership projections, player projections, top stack tool, the lineup builder, our premium Slack chat, and so much more. Of course, we have the Fantasy Cruncher add-on as well. And if you don't want to use the code NFL Strategy to get 50% off your first month of all access content and an Awesemo Plus subscription, hit start membership, and we'll ask you what type of player you are. If you're a hobbyist, if you're a pro player, if you're serious, and we'll cater the subscription around you so you're not getting too little and you're not getting too much. Also, $3.95 per week is our express package. So we've got something for everyone. Go to awesemo.com/join. Use that sign-up code NFL Strategy. One word, get 50% off your first month. All right. Oakland and Detroit. Here's one where you'd be, I think I saw a stat where it's like, the only team with at least 3 offensive touchdowns in each of their last 4 games is the Oakland Raiders. Pretty intense, Sal. They've been putting up very solid offensive numbers, and they did much of this without Tyrone Williams, who returned and scored a touchdown, which means 5 games, 5 receiving touchdowns. You got a 50.5 over under here. Opened at 51.5, but still above 50, tied for the highest on the slate. 26.3 total for the Raiders, 24.3 for Detroit. They're 2-point dogs on the road. Let's start with the Oakland Raiders. Darren Waller, Tyrone Williams, Derek Carr, Josh Jacobs. How much interest do you have in Oakland this week?
Yeah, so I have a good amount of interest in this entire game. One of like the 2 or 3 highest interests for me is this game. So yeah, I'll start with Tyrone Williams. Darius Slay continues to practice limited. We'll see if he suits up. Even if he does, you're probably not going to see a shadow matchup. So if he's out, though, Rashad Melvin, and this is the bigger news, Rashad Melvin's given up 25 receptions, 425 yards, and 3 touchdowns this year. That's who Tyrone Williams will get to go up against. And the big point there is that so far this year, he's given up the 8th most yards, Melvin, and the 23rd most receptions. So there's a disparity, which means he's giving up a lot of big plays, which is Tyrone Williams' game. So Tyrone Williams, I'm going to have a lot of interest in this week. Probably more so as a run back option, stacking the Detroit side of it, but also as like a primary option to stack with a Derek Carr. And then the other guy would be Darren Waller. He's 6,300. The price point comes up for a couple of these tight ends this week, but it's still fine. Like if he was listed as a wide receiver, I think a lot of people would be okay paying that tag. So if you do get to Oakland here and you did want to stack it, I prioritize Tyrone Williams and Darren Waller. That probably shouldn't surprise too many people. He'll have a bit of a tough matchup when it comes to just safety coverage from Detroit, but it's not something that I'm too worried about for Darren Waller. So yeah, those 2 guys I have interest in. I do have interest in Josh Jacobs. Price tag comes up. Mike Daniels probably not going to be back. There's just really no word or a timetable on his recovery right now for Detroit, a defensive tackle there. So you get a team that's giving up the 2nd most fantasy points per game kind of quietly to the running back position in Detroit this season. Jacobs seeing right now 19.7 opportunities per game, primarily coming on the ground. 21 red zone looks. So it's a spot that I like. He just doesn't spend time behind the line of scrimmage. He's the quickest to hit holes. 2.51 seconds behind the line of scrimmage is the best in the slate. And he has a defense that's just, or an offensive line that's not allowing for many just stuffs in a really good adjusted line play, top 5 on the slate. So I like a lot of Oakland. If you want to go to Josh Jacobs, I think it's okay. I prioritize from this team probably Tyrone Williams, then Darren Waller, then Jacobs.
Okay. Yeah. Here's why I would put Darren Waller ahead of Tyrone Williams. Complete and utter lack of depth at the tight end position this week. And that's what it comes down to. It's more just it's a product of the slate for me, and tight end is really ugly.
Yeah, I think the probably, so if I'm game stacking this and I go to the Detroit side, I probably come to Tyrell Williams first, only because when it comes to tight end, and you can go to a 5-man stack and get to a Waller too, and I'll have Waller stacks with the run back of that. But yeah, it's just a spot where just like the matchup for Darren Waller's fine, but to pay up for some of the other options at running back or receiver, I think I find myself a lot so far building some one stack so far, getting to a lot of Zach Ertz, and I think it's just a product of price.
Yeah, man, Zach, he's going to be popular, and because it's a discounted price point. We'll get to you know what? Why don't let me go back for a second. I don't want to take up too much time, but let's go back to this just for a moment and talk about the expansive role that Dallas Goddard is beginning to see. If you look at the past couple of weeks for Goddard, he's actually seeing serious opportunities in this offense. Now, that doesn't mean that Zach Ertz isn't still the clear-cut guy here, because Dallas Goddard has run only, I think, 32 routes over his last 2 games, right? So that's certainly not something where you're like, oh, wow, Ertz has run way more routes than him. But what do you think about the fact that we've seen Dallas Goddard really getting looks in the red zone, which obviously was one of the reasons that they wanted to bring him on. But yeah, the target counts altogether, you've got 8, 4, and 5 for Goddard over the last 4 weeks, 9, 5, and 4. So 1 additional target for Zach Ertz. You would think it changes, but even in the red zone, they both have 2 red zone targets over the past 2 weeks. I don't know. It's an odd spot for me, knowing that Dallas Goddard has begun to get more involved. Now, I don't know how many 2 tight end sets they're going to use now. You get Desean Jackson back. Maybe you go less 12 personnel, but I still think they use both of them a lot. I just wish Goddard wasn't there from a DFS standpoint.
Yeah, that's fair. And honestly, just from a viewing standpoint, I don't know which one's which and when to cheer or not to cheer.
Dude, I'm a huge Eagles fan, and I say it every week. Until I see that 8 or 6, I have no idea who they are.
And that's the thing, too, because they literally wear, that's like the closest numbers that can possibly be, too.
I know it's one of 2 people, but I just don't know which one.
It's so difficult. So, yeah, no, I agree. Like, he played his 5 more snaps than he has all season, Goddard. They're running a ton of 2 tight end sets. They did it a lot last year, too, but I imagine if Desean Jackson comes out, it changes. The good news for Ertz, though, is it's not like Goddard running these snaps and routes is taking from him, because he continues to just play 80+% of the snaps more weeks than not, and it hasn't really impacted him. Last week, they ran the most 2 tight end sets, which made sense because Howard had a good day on the ground and they ran a lot. So, yeah, it is concerning. I'd rather him not be there and just have 1 tight end on the field at all times. But I think it's okay for the way that they run offense. They did it a lot last year, too, and obviously Ertz had the season that he had. So just at the price point, the upside of Ertz is probably what's drawing me there. I know the ownership is following it, but it's a spot that come Sunday, I think I'll probably still be on Ertz. Yeah,
and I think that's perfectly reasonable. One of the big things with Goddard recently is more so just that he's been more efficient, right? 2.53 yards per route run over his last 3 games. So you could make the argument, and Ertz is at 1.26, so a steep drop off. You could very much make the argument, though, that that's not sustainable. And I wouldn't argue against it. But I should have mentioned it. I actually think if you're not looking to pay up at the position, Dallas Goddard at that cheap price point isn't the craziest idea. You could see like a Jonnu Smith type of game, where he ends up having 3 for 60 and a touchdown. And at a weak position that may not feature any super high scoring players this week, Goddard's not the craziest idea either.
Yeah, I agree. 4 out of the last 5 weeks. I mean, he's paid off the tag he's at now.
Yep. What do you think of Detroit here going up against Oakland in Oakland? Should be, like we said, one of the highest scoring games on the slate.
Yeah, so right now Detroit is probably going to come in as a top 3 stacking interest of mine. I like Matt Stafford here. I like these receivers in their matchups. Oakland right now, I mean, we've just seen it back-to-back weeks. Last week, Deshaun Watson did really whatever he wanted. Hopkins was getting open. Week before is when Aaron Rodgers goes nuts in that whole entire offense. So they're giving up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and just giving up points everywhere to wide receivers. So I like the spot for Matt Stafford. He has 2 clear wide receivers to pair him with Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones. If you want to get a little bit cute, you can go to Danny Amendola, who has a fine matchup in the slot. But it's a spot that I really like here. And when you factor in that Kerryon Johnson's not back here, he's on IR right now, and they have 4 running backs back there who 2 out of the 3 primary ones are pass catching guys, I would say, is where their strong points are. It just helps a guy like Matt Stafford even more, who's 2nd on the slate in pass attempts per game and 1st in passing yards per game. So really like Detroit as a whole entire stack here, starting with Matt Stafford.
Yeah, I mean, the snap counts last week, 40% for Ty Johnson, 24% for Nick Bawden, J.D. McKissick with 25%, Trey Carson with 30%. I don't see any way you can roll the dice on anybody there.
Yeah, I agree. And like another big piece of at least last week, like I know a lot of people probably went to Ty Johnson, didn't get off of him. When there's 4 running backs active, like definitely just don't even try and mess around with that. But also, like if you were somebody watching it and you still had Ty Johnson in your lineups, I went back and watched just like a lot of these games accelerated, like 10-minute thing. And he was overthrown on a wheel route, which would have been like a 30-yard touchdown. He had 2 like 15-yard plays called back. So it had to be the most frustrating thing ever for the people that actually went through and played him.
For sure. If you want a free NFL 2019 Awesemo Plus Pass, all you have to do is guess the player that scores the most fantasy points tonight between the Niners and Cardinals. Very simple. Go to Awesemo_com on Twitter, retweet, like, and reply to the tweet. Follow Awesemo_com and Awesemo NFL. I won't repeat it again because as long as you know to get to Awesemo_com on Twitter, you'll see the pinned tweet right there giving away a free 2019 Awesemo Plus NFL Season Pass. Just reply with the player that scores the most fantasy points. Follow the rules, and you'll be entered to win. Good luck to all of you. All right, Sal. Anything else here? You know what? Let me ask you this. Make it quick. Top plays from this game overall.
Yeah, so I would rank it. For me, it's 1, Kenny Golladay, 2, Tyrone Williams, 3, Waller, and then 4, Marvin Jones.
Okay. Tampa Bay, Seattle, tied with Oakland, Detroit for the highest total on the slate. I have some interesting feelings about this game, though, and we can bounce them off of each other. 50.5 total, 28.3 implied total for Seattle, 22.3 for the Tampa Bay Bucs. The Seattle Seahawks are 6-point home favorites, no surprise. Biggest pass funnel defense in the league right now is the Tampa Bay Bucs. The run defense it has not been a mirage. They've been very good. Pro Football Focus has them, Football Outsiders has them ranked number 1 in run defense this season. They're the only team that's been able to slow Christian McCaffrey on the ground. They're a top 5 grade according to Pro Football Focus. I mean, it's been a very solid season for them in plugging up holes and keeping running backs off the board. Pass defense, however, downright dreadful, and I expect this to continue. When you look at what we've got here for Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, you've got, well, how about this? Looking at the matchups, first of all, Tyler Lockett's probably going to get a pretty solid matchup, but so is everybody, right? I don't see how, Vernon Hargreaves, for example, allowing 1.89 yards per route covered. To make it even worse, Sal, 0.41 fantasy points per route thrown at. That's one of the worst marks in the league. He has one of the worst grades according to Pro Football Outsiders. That's just Tyler Lockett. You get to all of these guys, and all of them have the advantage here, whether it's Metcalf, if he's going to see Murphy bunting, or really whoever it is. The only question is Pete Carroll going to look to dominate the game on the ground, even if they aren't getting a lot of production? We've seen him do it before, but it's been a big-time pass funnel defense for Tampa Bay all season long.
Yeah, and that's the biggest question here is they're 6-point home favorites. Historically, they'll try and run the ball, but now you get a roadblock here that says Tampa Bay's defense should stop Chris Carson. We'll see, though, a guy who's getting 20 attempts per game on the ground. The big problem here for me is just, first of all, I really didn't have at these price points all that much interest. I get it that the matchup is fantastic, but all that much interest in sort of stacking a Wilson, Metcalf, and a Lockett lineup together. I just like the upside in some other spots. But then you factor in that everybody on this offense is chalky. Like even Russell Wilson is approaching, I think, the highest ownership number we've had on a quarterback this season, close to 20%. Chris Carson's a top 2 owned player. Like everybody's chalky. So for me as a 6-point favorite in a spot where more times than not, you see Russell Wilson throw like 28 times here. And we saw this when they played Arizona. Like they just got ahead big. Everybody wanted to own Seattle, and then they just let Chris Carson do whatever he wanted. Again, a much different matchup on the ground for Chris Carson, but it's a spot that I feel uneasy about right now, and I was hoping to just leverage the field by going to a Chris Carson if everybody was going to own the passing game, but it seems like everybody's owning Chris Carson as of right now, so it's a spot that I'm probably struggling with the most, and I lean to get under the field on really all of it. DK Metcalf had 2 touchdowns last week, probably the flukiest 2-touchdown game as he was just wide open on both. Like nobody was even around him on both of his touchdowns inside the red zone. So he relies very much on touchdowns. Tyler Lockett's a fine play if you want to pay for him, probably the one I feel the most secure about. And that's really it for me in this passing game. I just don't like the ownership numbers for a 6-point home favorite.
Okay. What about the other side where you're looking at Mike Evans coming off of a monster game. Talking about Chris Godwin, who for the most part has been really solid, but he's all over the place. I mean, that's a product of Jameis Winston's ability to really form any semblance of consistency. But do you like them coming back the other way here, assuming that Seattle has a lead?
Yeah, I do. So I like Jameis here. And again, he could be a terrible real life quarterback and get interceptions, but that honestly probably correlates better for his fantasy performances, just throwing the ball than like 50 times. So the problem is, and if it is a problem, depending on how you build your lineups, is just getting both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans in if you're trying to stack this. I like both of them individually. They both have good matchups. You're probably going to see Trey Flowers come back this week for Seattle. You're not going to have Shaq Griffin on Mike Evans just because of a size difference. They'll probably put Trey Flowers there, who has not been all that great this year. Chris Godwin coming out of the slot will have a fine matchup for himself. So, yeah, I like Jameis Winston this week. I like pairing him with both of those guys if I'm playing in GPPs for stack upside. It's just a matter of finding the salary relief, and maybe Jalen Samuels is that guy if he opens up. Probably another reason why I was getting a lot of Ertz was this was one of my higher owned stacks, and he's just a salary relief guy. So I really like Tampa. I like Godwin and Evans. They'll both have fine matchups in a spot where they're going to go into Seattle as underdogs, and the game script, especially with their running back, should be Jameis throw the ball 40, 45 times, probably throw 3 interceptions, but it doesn't really hurt us all that much in fantasy.
So who do you want to run it back with?
That's the issue. So the issue in running this back is everybody's expensive, and you're almost forced to go to a DK Metcalf for some sort of salary relief. Chris Carson in a really tough matchup, and then if you're going to pay these top 2 wide receivers from Tampa, it's almost impossible to get Tyler Lockett into your lineups at that point. So it's like by default you get to DK Metcalf, which I don't like all that much. But when you factor in his matchup, it makes it a little bit better to digest. I just think DK Metcalf, he's priced up for having the matchup, but having a 2-touchdown game last week where he didn't really have to do much to get open on those touchdowns. So it's a weird spot. As much as I like Tampa, the run back option isn't that great. But right now, Jameis is my third most interested quarterback.
I mentioned last week that Jaron Brown could have been a viable value play. He didn't see a single target. He played 54 snaps and 60% of the snaps in weeks 6 and 7. Week 8, he played 28 snaps, and David Moore played 49. DK Metcalf played 92. That's actually what stands out to me, is that Metcalf had seen limited snaps around 70% for 4 weeks. And then 92% last week. Do you think that's here to stay, where he and Lockett are now playing the same amount of snaps or around that per game? Because if so, it would make Metcalf a bit more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I saw, and I just when I saw it, just thought maybe that was the way that game script goes, but it's something to keep an eye on. David Moore was the other one that I saw too. Coming into the year, he was supposed to be the clear-cut number 3 receiver on the outside with Lockett in the slot, but he got hurt. They had a cut, and then they re-signed right away, Jaron Brown. So it's finally that David Moore takes over those. I think that probably stays more so than Metcalf playing 90%, but I do think that Metcalf snaps, if they hovered around 80, I would be okay with that. I guess it's something to monitor moving forward.
For sure. Cleveland, Denver. Oh, here we are. Joe Flacco out with a neck injury. No, I'm kidding. I actually do think he's hurt, but it was just coincidental that he was ruled out a day or two after he said all those things about the way this team's been coached by Vic Fangio. I mean, look, not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here. I think he probably is dealing with a neck injury, but it just sounded kind of weird. Now you've got yourselves Brandon Allen starting this game for Denver. Maybe Cleveland can finally get a win here. Meanwhile, Baker Mayfield in the media, or in the news again, for kind of lashing out at the media. I thought his response to that was perfectly fine, saying, you guys want the truth. You guys want us to be raw and honest. And then when we do it, you call us out. I don't like you much, Baker, but I'm with you there. I try and be objective, Sal.
It's almost a lose-lose situation for them.
Oh, no question about it. But yeah, look, terribly low total. The only other one outside of the Bills and Redskins that's below 40, 21-point total for Cleveland, 18 for the Broncos. Broncos are 3-point dogs. It's an ugly game, but we got to start with Nick Chubb. Yards after contact, this guy's been absolutely superb. He's the only reason they're not getting crushed every game. He's got 20 plus carries in 4 of his last 5. Quite frankly, if you want to win this game, run Nick Chubb 35 times, Sal. I'm not even being hyperbolic. Like, I would give Nick Chubb the ball on every single snap.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, he's been fantastic, yards after contact. Every single week watching him. I mean, last week he fumbles the first 2 drives away to New England, but every single drive.
That was unfortunate, but production-wise was still amazing.
Exactly. He's currently number 3 right now on the ground behind just Cook and Christian McCaffrey in Pro Football Focus overall, just rushing grades. He's 3rd in elusive rating for running backs over 100 carries. He's been really, really good this year. Number 1 in breakaway percentage for anybody above 70% attempts. Like, the problem is, and if there is one, it's just really the matchup. And Denver right now is a top 3 run defense. The only time that they've looked a little bit susceptible for the most part was Leonard Fournette when they were dealing with injuries on their defensive line. That said, Chubb's going to be a guy that I end up getting to. I'm not sure. His ownership right now is probably the top end of where I would feel comfortable getting to him at, around the 25%, quarter of my lineups. I'd probably say I come in maybe around 20% if I had to guess, but he's fine to get to. He's the only thing that I really want here. Odell probably going to have a shadow matchup. Chris Harris has been fantastic when he shadows 3 times this year. Allen Robinson, 2 catches for 13 yards. Devontae Adams was only targeted twice in the game that he played against Chris Harris Jr., which is a surprise for how much that Rodgers looks his way. 2 catches for 36 yards. T.Y. Hilton, 2 catches, 56 yards. The main catch coming in late in that game on a wild catch. So not really interested in Odell here, even at a cheaper tag. I think Jarvis Landry is at a 4K price point, somebody you could take stabs on. He's a guy that is going to probably have the best matchup out of all these receivers. And if you're just talking about the bad offensive line play that so far Cleveland has seen, it makes sense to have him as sort of an escape route a little bit. Not the greatest of matchups in the slot, but in the 4K range, it's something like I would rather have the Carolina guys, but it's something that's at least worth mentioning. It's really just Nick Chubb from the Browns.
What about Denver?
Yeah, I mean, Denver, it's really hard to like much when Brandon Allen's starting. I mean, they're going to have Fred Brown on the outside for one receiver. Cortland Sutton on the other hash mark is fine. It's just how much do you trust Brandon Allen, and maybe he can be okay in this spot. It's just not a spot against a good pass rush in Cleveland that I really want to target outside receivers. So as good as he's been, he'll face probably Greedy Williams for parts of the game, Denzel Ward, which are not easy matchups to go up against. The main part here is probably just Noah Fant, and there's a couple reasons why. You saw Emmanuel Sanders leave, and a lot of people thought it would help Desean Hamilton, and overall maybe targets-wise it does, but he's staying in the same role in the slot. It started to help Noah Fant a lot more in the middle of the field, but the bigger bump up was that Jeff Hirman got hurt last week, and they're saying that there's a good chance he doesn't play this week. If that's the case, you saw Noah Fant play 82% of the snaps and see a season high, career high, that being 8 targets. So for a $3,000 tight end, he's right now sort of my favorite punty type tight end if you want to get to him. Just verify that Jeff Hirman will be out Sunday, because if he is, you're probably seeing a 70 to 80% snaps run, if not more, for Noah Fant. But outside of that, it's really just Fant as a punt. These running backs continue to just split dead even. 51% of the snaps for Freeman, I believe, last week, and 49 for Philip Lindsay. It's really tough to see some sort of ceiling game, or at least predict it without just taking a stab, and I'm probably not going to do that.
Let's move on, because I'm done talking about that game. There really isn't much. Chargers, Green Bay Packers. Last one here on the schedule, Sal. Green Bay, I mean, it was incredible what we saw done in the passing game last week with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. I mean, Jones, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 159 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jamal Williams had 14 yards on 3 receptions and 3 targets. And what I find interesting is go ahead and take a look at what we've seen in terms of targets recently for Green Bay since Davante Adams went out. But we can just use, say, the past 2 weeks if you want. 11 targets for running backs last week, 14 for wide receivers. The week before that, 11 targets for running backs and 10, 11, 13 for wide receivers, 12 for running backs the week before that, and 17 for receivers, 13 for running backs the week before that, and only 12 for receivers. There's a clear pattern here that Rodgers doesn't trust his wide receivers when Davante Adams is out. And I think he continues to feature his running backs in the passing game. I'm not saying it makes any of them a must play, but I think it's a wrinkle that needs to be added into our analysis until they get healthy at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, it's been the biggest mask of this offense without Davante Adams is just how good, and it's really elite usage and production from Aaron Jones. Like, we're talking some of the best running backs in the league, what this guy is doing in the passing game when you're up there with Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, on how good he's been. on 60% snaps. And yeah, a lot of it's scheme. You saw this past week and really the last 2 or 3 weeks, he's on the outside. Like he scored on a wide receiver screen as a running back on the outside, a double move on the outside. Matt LaFleur, credit to him, who I criticized earlier in the year for not getting creative with his running backs, has now for a month straight when he needs to with no Devontae Adams. The number 1 receiver on this team is running back Aaron Jones. The number 2 receiver on this team is running back Jamal Williams right now in terms of how much Aaron Rodgers trusts them and how they scheme for these players. And it should be. They never drafted anybody in the draft at wide receiver, running out Jake Kumru, a preseason star mostly, and a bunch of late round undrafted free agents and Alan Lazard, Darius Shepard. It's not going to work. So honestly, they probably had their luck a little bit too much right now. I think a lot of that goes to the coach for good scheming, but just the overproduction of these running backs, it's going to continue to happen. Even if Adams comes back, you're going to continue to see it because now they know that it's a mismatch that they have in Aaron Jones and Williams. So I really like Aaron Jones this week. If Devontae Adams misses, he's one of the better plays on the slate at $7,000. You have all the chalk coming in on Chris Carson, Bell, and Nick Chubb, and they're all fine running backs, some in tough spots. But if Adams misses again, it's going to be hard for me not to get to Aaron Jones over all those guys for a cheaper price point. Adams was limited on Wednesday, but they said he never put his helmet on, so it doesn't seem like he actually practiced all that much.
Trent Williams tried to put his helmet on.
Yeah, I saw like headlines about that. What exactly happened there? Is it a quick story? I just assumed
there's something about like passing a physical and trying your helmet on. So the helmet discomfort, right?
Okay.
Was the reason he failed his physical. It's seriously the oddest
he's been holding out, right? So, I mean, it seems a little fishy.
Yeah, Williams, who ended his holdout Tuesday, did not pass his physical because there was discomfort when he put on his helmet. He underwent surgery to remove a growth on his head in the offseason. So, that's got to have something to do with it. But what an odd reason.
Wow. Yeah, I saw headlines for it. I didn't click on it, but I really didn't know what it meant. But, yeah, that's weird.
Very, very strange. Do you have any interest in the Chargers here, seeing Melvin Gordon at a discount? I know Spags had some tournament interest in him when we talked yesterday. Austin Eckler, of course, should be continue to be featured in this offense. But just after we said Anthony Lynn, figured things out, he saw Austin Eckler got 6 total looks, only 5 touches in a game, by the way, that they should have lost. Fortunately, the Bears still don't have a kicker. What are you doing with like Keenan Allen and who is questionable, but I think he should play. He played through that injury last week, had 7 for 53 on 10 targets. Any interest in the Chargers?
Yeah, there's going to be interest as home underdogs. It's just a good spot for Rivers in that sense. It's a bad spot in terms of Packers, probably a top 2 or 3 pass rush in the league with a solid secondary, comes to town against a really beat up offensive line that this team's really, for the most part, been surviving on dinking and diming their way down the field. So Rivers at his price point as a home underdog, it's interesting for me in tournaments, and there's just so many pieces that you can stack him with. So I'll have him as like a 4th interest or 5th in stacks and a decent amount of them. But in terms of just like cash or anything, it's just too much risk in that offensive line. When you get down to all these players, it's really hard to project out how the Packers are going to go about this game. They can go in a couple of ways. Tyrone Williams, their slot cornerback, has only given up 8 catches through 8 weeks, 14 yards per week and 1 catch per week. He's been very solid, and he's had more than half of his yards come on one play to Chad Beebe week 2 on just pretty much a broken play where he falls down. So he's very much improved as a 36-year-old defensive back. The reason why we go into detail on him is they might feel confident enough in his play to just leave him in the slot against Keenan Allen and not shadow Jair Alexander in there. If that happens, then Jair Alexander goes on Mike Williams, which is a much worse matchup for Mike Williams than Kevin King. So that's the way that I see it happening, which just really makes the whole offense unattractive outside of Hunter Henry. If for some reason Tyrone Williams is not going to kind of be the guy in the slot against Keenan Allen and it's Jair, well, then Mike Williams or Keenan Allen's going to have Jair on him in the slot. Well, then Mike Williams on the outside gets Kevin King. Really good matchup for him there. So it's kind of just judging what happens. I think you get Jair on Mike Williams, and in the slot, you just keep the slot corner has been very good there, Tyrone Williams. So the one that stands out for me the most is Hunter Henry, a tight end who will have a good advantage. The Packers have struggled, and it's all premier tight ends for the most part, but Zach Ertz, and Travis Kelce and Darren Waller have all had quality to really good games against them. And now Hunter Henry comes in as another quality tight end. So he's the guy who stands out the most for me. After that, I probably take stabs on Mike Williams. Don't have much interest in Keenan Allen. I like the price point. I think he's really good. If you're stacking him, he becomes more of a priority. But as a one-off, I probably don't get there as much.
Yeah, I mean, Williams has been in the slot 79% of the time this year. You would think Allen definitely sees the bulk of him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like in the past, the Packers will shadow Jair Alexander into there, but I think a lot of that was just not confidence in the slot cornerback at the time, and now they can have that.
All right. Well, Sal, tell everyone where they can find you before we head out for the day.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SalVetri_DFS, and you can just find my YouTube channel. It is my name, just Sal Vetri, if you want more fantasy content. And then here on the Awesemo channel, I will be here every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 11 a.m. talking NFL. Wednesday mornings with Josh Engelman at 9:30 a.m. talking NBA.
That'll do it for us. Before you head out, hit us with a thumbs up, like the video. Support us by doing something as simple as that, clicking subscribe and that notification bell so you always know when content's going to drop next. We appreciate it. It allows us to continue to give out free content right here at youtube.com/Awesemo. Remember, check out the pinned tweet at awesemo_com. Follow Sal Vetri on the Twitter at SalVetriDFS, myself at Laffy_D. You can see our handles right below our heads. And don't forget, all of the programming coming up today. Have a great Halloween. Deeper dive coming up later, live before lock. And, of course, the showdown slate will take you up to this Thursday night football game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Arizona Cardinals. As always, it's been fun. We'll catch you back here tomorrow. Manny Laura, Chris Randone, taking a look at lineup building on the NFL Strategy Show, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you tomorrow.